Thank you. Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. So, I don't plan to be too long at all. So, let me introduce myself. I am Carlon Mendoza from San Fernando. Anybody from South here? Travel all of the way up the road, the highway, nice drive. And yeah, I work with Climate Analytics, which is a non-profit sort of think tank organization which we deal with climate change issues around the world. And we have an office here in the Caribbean, and we focus on actions that could help implement what we call the Paris Agreement, or which is the largest treaty that deals with climate change globally, and how we could implement those actions locally here within our laws, our regulations, our policies, and by our actions. And today is one of the days that we taking the information that we learn and the information that we practice and putting it into action here on the ground in this Ital Food Festival. So, with that being said, I'll move along to some a little icebreaker question or questions. So feel free. This is very interactive. This is us having a conversation about how we understand climate change. So an obvious question: who knows someone who works with both a fan? I've seen somebody fanning there, Megan, an umbrella, a raincoat, boots, because the weather is so unpredictable. And recently, of course. You know? So that is one of the things, one of the ways which we obviously experience our changing climate, because of the fact that, if you want to, for lack of a better word, schizophrenic. Vaiki vai, as we say in Trinidad. 1 minute you go outside, hot sun, and the next minute rain crash down. And then when they say rain crash down, if in Port of Spain, well, I'm not from Port of Spain, but in Port of Spain, they say if you spit in the drain, it is flood. So with that comes floods, with comes the other spin-off effects from this weather conditions that we would have experienced. Another question is, who here thinks that the Caribbean people are some of the most resilient people in the world? So you're saying yes, but why would you say yes? Just shout out any answer. Why you think we're resilient? Why you think Caribbean people are some of the strongest people in the world? Correct, we get through hurricanes, but what happens after? We rebuild, yeah. Do we rebuild better or the same? Huh? It depends on the resources, yes. It depends on a lot of other conditions or factors. Money. It depends on where, say for example, if a hurricane affected some coastal homes, if the coast is still able to hold or is able to sustain a building or sustain infrastructure, that is also a factor. So I'll bring this home by saying that when we say, or anybody says, the sun too hot, this place hot, look, I was sweating, or the rain continuously falling, it is something that you yourself are already a climate activist. You already have accepted the fact that the changing climate is here, it's present. People who used to deny that climate change is not a real thing could no longer say that because of the fact that you're experiencing the effects of a hotter sun or a warmer temperature that we have in the Caribbean. And globally, that is. So with that comes some responsibilities or some actions that we possibly could take. So within this process of climate change, some Caribbean countries, what we call small island developing states, they took a sort of campaign or slogan to the global UN body that deals with climate change, that is the United Nations body on climate change. They took this campaign of 1.5 degrees to stay alive. And that simply means, when broken down, is that there were a group of scientists internationally from the Caribbean, from global south, from global north, all over the world, who did some studies to show that if we continuously keep on doing activities that are harmful to the environment or that create much more emissions in the air, it is something that would continuously warm the temperature. And if we shoot past this temperature, it will be very much unsustainable. So some people could find that right now it's unsustainable. Imagine if it continues to get hotter. So that 1.5 degree campaign means that if we continue our actions in terms of fossil fuel exploration and the amount of emissions that are burned or expended from other industrial or extractive activities, if we continue on that trajectory, then we will surpass that 1.5 degree temperature limit, which therefore now makes life and livelihoods unsustainable for us, for the planet, for us as humans, for our plants, for the animals, etc., everyone. And with that, a group of small island developing states from the Caribbean, from the Pacific, went to the UN meetings and made this campaign to have that set as the long-term temperature goal. And with that goal, states, countries now have to take actions to implement and try and get on that path towards that goal so that we could reduce our emissions after a certain amount of years so that we could comfortably live and more likely for our future generations. So it's something called intergenerational development or equity, making sure that we're not only studying about ourselves now, but we're studying about future generations. And that temperature goal is what most of us still to this day in the system which I currently operate in, we advocate for those actions. And those actions come about from, as I said, states not exploring new fossil fuels, reducing subsidies on fossil fuels, moving towards renewable energy. So we have a lot of electric vehicles happening within the country, reducing taxes on those electric vehicles. We have solar panels moving off from this grid system into a solar panel system or operating in that sort of renewable energy light. And that is very important for us because those are some of the small actions or some of the policies, that are taken globally, and then it now brings it back home into how we implement or act day to day. Of course, those things require financing and those things require much more investments, but it's something that we're working towards. So, all of that is simply leading us to why we are here and what could we do in terms of the issue of climate justice. Climate justice is this phrase or terminology that we use within the system where we try to ensure that the rights of persons are taken into consideration in this fight for climate change, in this fight of climate action. And we have a number of ways we could do this. But what we have to understand, the concept is that we, as Caribbean people particularly, we have not really contributed much. Yes, some of our countries are oil producing, but the percentage of the emissions that we contribute is not as high as some of the other countries, especially in the time when the Industrial Revolution and development was happening. So are not the ones most responsible because the scientists indicated that because of those actions, then it now leads us to be in this position as we are today. So with that, we have a number of ways in which we could sort of combat or fight against that system. And in fighting against that, we could do some procedural justice rights, which is advocate for stronger laws, advocate for how we just operate within the system in terms of, as I said about the electric vehicles, in terms of advocating for the change from that oil and gas sort of mindset into this renewable energy mindset. Again, there are other simple things we do in terms of recycling and watching our emissions. And obviously, we're here in an Ital food festival, which promotes sustainability and green eating and a way of life in terms of veganism, because in the meat producing industry, in the extractive industry, they also have a high number of emissions that come out of the production and consumption of cattle and livestock, etc. So that is also one of the ways in which we could understand this issue of climate justice. So as I said, I won't be too long, and I hope this kind of gave you all a clear understanding. And if you have any questions, we're here to have a discussion about the climate change, the impacts that we feel, and what we could do as citizens of the Caribbean, of Trinidad and Tobago particularly, because as I said, we fight in a bloc called Small Island Developing States to really advocate in the global process for finance, for development, for capacity building, and just overall climate justice. Thank you.
Okay. Do you all have questions? Please, Steve, ask him some questions. Ask the expert. Go on. Do you want the mic?
No, thank you.
Okay.
Came in a little late, but I'm a fan of this.
Great.
Does this website give us ideas to prompt us what's next? Like, are there categories?
Huh?
Ways, are there ideas to prompt us
Yeah.
for better thinking?
Of course. So as I said, we are a think tank organization. I didn't think this is not ours. This is Rethink Your Food, but but in general, yes, of course, it's all connected. And what I'm going to say is that our website, climateanalytics.com, if you go on that website, you would find all our reports in digestible form, briefs, blogs, very much in layman forms for everyone to read and digest. Yeah, in terms of the categories, as you're speaking about, in terms of what we could do, and in terms of the different levels of global warming that we experience. Sometimes we even break it down by country to show you what one country is particularly doing in order to achieve these climate goals. So we have something called the Climate Action Tracker, which tracks how countries report on their emissions and the activities that they take to reduce their emissions, as you were saying, in terms of the introduction of EVs, the solar panels, the different grid systems that they'll be implementing. So that is something that we have available in our resource tab on the website.
Any more questions?
In order to change the mindset of people, right? Do you all have any programs like in schools where you could reach the young people so as they come up and they become leaders, they will have a change of thinking and we can have full cultural change. Is there anything like that?
So we are a non-profit organization, so we operate mainly based on funding from proposal, grant writing, and we write proposals. But I could tell you within our proposal writing, and particularly our office in the Caribbean, we have done a number of campaigns throughout the schools. We had this campaign, I think it was last year, where we had schools do a communications project in terms of what they understand about climate change, and then they did a video and explained it. And we had some honorable mentions of, I think it was Marbella Secondary School, and we had some very good entries from different secondary schools within Trinidad and Tobago. We also, we have, as I said, because we don't have that direct fund support of funds, we can't go into schools. But I also participated in a sustainability week at the Cipriani Labour College as well, where we had a booth and we had the same sort of session in terms of education. So, and then we also operate with the Green Screen Film Festival, where we also had a video documentary showing exactly the impact of climate change in Trinidad and Tobago, St. Lucia, and Dominica. So that is something, even if you go on the website, on our YouTube page, you would see that documentary. It's about 45 minutes. We hoped we could have showed it today, but it's something very interesting where it shows the, particularly how Dominica and Hurricane Maria ravaged Dominica, and how the indigenous people, the Kalinagos in Dominica, how they were able to be sustainable, how they were able to really combat the impact of Hurricane Maria by utilizing the land and utilizing what they had. So that's very much instructive in our video. Yeah.
I see what you think, so again, I came in.
Yeah, I'll talk about it in a minute. After he's done. Okay.
I want takeaways. I want to be able to
Absolutely.
Yeah.